Church, great to see you this morning, especially if you're new here. I love that you're joining with us and grateful for you being spending your Memorial Day weekend with us. It means a lot. To this day, I still have a recurring nightmare every few months. I don't know if you've ever had this dream, but I have it pretty regularly where I'm back in college. It's the end of the semester, and it's the day before it's about to end, and I find out that I'm enrolled in a class that I thought I had dropped. And the final exam is coming the very next day. It's terrifying, right? It's the worst dream ever, and I have this on a recurring basis, and it's inevitably that, like, you know how this works. Like tests or exams, like they're stressful enough as they are when you know that they're coming, but like when you find out, oh, it's coming tomorrow, it's even worse. And so I kid you not, there are times that are literally in real life I've woken up sweating because I'm so stressed out and anxious about the exam that's not going to happen at all, right? And it's been like 20 years since I've taken an exam, yet I still have this dream. Some of you might be right there with me. It's a terrible dream. We're moving through the Gospel of Mark, and maybe the best way for me to describe it this morning is that Jesus, he's been teaching his disciples all semester. He's been training them. He's been equipping them. He's been instructing them, and today is exam day. All right, today is the final test, and we're going to see in just a moment that they're not ready for it. All right, or another way to maybe say it is they did not see it coming. And that's kind of the worst type of test, isn't it? The one that you don't see coming. All right, I'm not just talking about in school. I mean, we all know, right? It's well after school is over, the tests don't stop coming. All of life, right? All of life, you are going to experience different tests. And what's the worst kind of testing? The ones that you don't expect. I mean, those are the absolute hardest ones that you ever go through in life. It's we had no idea that this was coming. All right, this is like, I had no idea this was about to happen. This is like all of a sudden overnight this happened, didn't expect it at all, and now I'm trying to make sense of all of life. What is that? That's a test. That's a test. And here's what's about to happen right here in Mark chapter 4 today. After hearing Jesus' teaching, right, his stories, his parable, all the stories and parables that we've looked at for the last few weeks, after hearing all of those stories, all of Jesus' teaching, Jesus is going to test his disciples and see, do you really trust me? Do you trust me? In fact, let's look at it. Let's look what happens here. Starting in verse 35 this morning, here's what it says. If you have your Bible still in front of you, verse 35 says, "On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to the disciples, 'Let us go across to the other side.'" He's talking about the Sea of Galilee. Let's go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat just as he was, and other boats were with him. Now, one of the neat things about Mark's gospel is that Mark loves to include all kinds of irrelevant details. All right, all kinds of little details that you're like, what's that there for? That doesn't contribute to the plot. That doesn't build the character formation at all. But there's little tiny details that he includes along the way. And the reason why I say that is because some of you, I know you might be new to a lot of this. Maybe you're new to Christianity. Maybe you're new to maybe you're even just in a position right now, you're exploring the faith and you're asking questions about Jesus. And maybe you're even reading the Bible for the very first time. Man, there is nothing better than reading the Bible and meeting Jesus. And you're there right now. But I want you to notice as we go through this story, it's a short story, right? Just a few verses. But as we go through this story, I want you to notice the number of very specific details that are included in this story. For example, we're told what time of day it is. All right, Mark is quick to observe. It's in the evening after a full day of teaching. Second, we're told that the disciples are with Jesus in the boat. All right, so if there's 12 disciples plus Jesus, that's 13 people in the boat. They're all at the same time. What's interesting about that is, I learned this week actually, in 1987, two Israeli archaeologists, actually they were brothers, in 1987, they basically found a boat that was buried at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee. They excavated the boat. They had a whole team of people that were helping do this. And when they excavated it, what they found was this boat was the exact same size of the boat that we're seeing in this story. I'm not saying it was the exact same boat, okay? But it was the exact same size, dated back to that same time period. It was a boat that it was about 27 feet long, about 7 feet wide. It held about 15 people comfortably, just adding a little bit of veracity to the story that we're looking at right here. But not only that, we're given more details. Jesus isn't just in the boat, but verse 37, what happens? It says, "And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But Jesus was where? In the stern. And what was he doing? He was asleep. And where was he asleep? On the cushion. It's just like detail after detail after detail. It's almost like, Mark, why are you telling us all these things? Like, these things don't really matter that much. Richard Bauckham from the University of Cambridge, he says this. He says, one of the defining traits of ancient eyewitness accounts is the prevalence of irrelevant details. Right? And he's comparing like ancient legends to eyewitness accounts. He says one of the defining traits of ancient eyewitness accounts is the prevalence of irrelevant details. Scholars who believe the Gospel of Mark is fiction have trouble explaining why Mark mentions the other boats around Jesus' boat. That's another detail. Or why Jesus was specifically asleep in the boat on a cushion. These sorts of details don't advance the plot and don't develop the characters. They are so unnecessary to the story and therefore have the marks of genuine reminiscence. In other words, he's saying, here's how you know that this actually happened. Right? It's kind of like listening to a story from Grandpa, right? When he includes like all these different like all these different details in the story, and you're like, why is he telling us this? That's just the way that Grandpa is. Like, it's a part of his memory. He has to tell that part to tell the story, right? Now look what happens here. Verse 37 again, it says, and a great windstorm arose. That word great, it's the Greek word, the scriptures were originally written in Greek. It's the Greek word megon, where we get the word mega from. So a great mega storm. And the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. All right, now you need to understand something about the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee was actually known for its unpredictable storms. All right, the Sea of Galilee actually sat 700 feet below sea level. All right, it's the lowest freshwater body in the entire world. You can go look this up. 700 feet below sea level. But the interesting thing about the sea, this is a real picture of Sea of Galilee. The interesting thing about it is that it's actually surrounded on the north by this mountain chain. It goes all the way from the north to the northwest. And at the peak is Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon sits at 9,200 feet above sea level. All right, so just think about this for a moment. You got 700 feet below sea level to Mount Hermon, 9,200 feet above it. So when the cool air from Mount Hermon comes rushing down and collides with the warm air of the Sea of Galilee, it results in these super intense storms. And it's very, very unpredictable. In fact, the one thing that they always say about the Sea of Galilee is that you can predict is the unpredictable storms. Like, it's going to happen at some point, but there's no way. If you had like a GPS or a weather app back then, it'd be like, it wouldn't do you any good at all, right? Because it's like the one thing we know is that these storms come out of nowhere. Some of you have probably been there before. You've been to Israel, you've been to the Sea of Galilee, and yeah, you know, it's just like all of a sudden these things pop up, super high winds. All right, that's what it's known for, super high winds, very intense. Now, we also know this must have been a particularly intense storm, because if you know anything about Jesus' disciples, like at least 7 out of the 12 disciples were fishermen, right? So they're kind of accustomed to this. They're accustomed to life on the sea. They know what to expect in moments like this, but even they're afraid. And if they're afraid, it just is telling us, wow, this must be very, very intense. Now, just look at what they do here in verse 38. It says they woke Jesus up. All right, so Jesus was sleeping, right? They woke Jesus up and they said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Now, what's interesting about that is this is actually the only time in the Gospels recorded that Jesus is asleep. Did you know that? The only time. I mean, of course, yeah, he slept every night, but this is the only time that we're told that he's asleep, and it's in the midst of this terrible storm. And it's just wow. One, it tells us probably how tired he was. Have you ever been so tired that you're like, I could sleep through something like that? Right? Like, I'm so exhausted. Yeah. It reminds me of one of my brothers was in the military, and I remember when he went through boot camp, I would ask him stories like, what was it like? You know, and going through that seems like really crazy. And he's like, it's so exhausting. He's like, in fact, I remember a day that we were standing there and we were doing like the end of the day, like, I don't even know what they call it. You know, you're standing beside your bed and they're coming and checking your cubbies. And he's like, there will literally be soldiers standing and they'd fall asleep. Standing, right? That's how tired you can be, all right? This is how tired Jesus was. He'd been teaching all day long. And then they find him asleep in the stern of the boat. Now, the other thing that's really fascinating, I think, about this, think about what's happening here. The disciples are freaking out, right? They're so scared. And yet here's Jesus is asleep. And what it makes me think about, if you remember, if you've been here with us during this teaching series earlier in the Gospel of Mark chapter 1, there was a moment. Do you remember when all the other disciples were asleep? And where was Jesus? Bless you. He was awake, right? He was awake. He woke up early in the morning. He was awake praying while everybody else was asleep. And so what that tells us, like, there are certain moments when you find Jesus praying while the rest of the world is asleep, or even in a moment like this, where when everybody else is frantic, when everybody else is panicking, here's somebody who is asleep. I think that maybe is like a lesson, maybe like a little parable in and of itself for us today, that there are times when the rest of the world is frantic and praying, and we can just go to sleep, right? We know who's in charge. Like we can just rest. And there are other times when the world is like panicking and stressed, and we can go pray. And there are other times when the world is frantic that we can just go sleep. All right, I don't know. I think that's an interesting detail that we see right here. But how did Jesus respond? Look what happens in verse 39. It says, Jesus awoke. He rebuked the wind, and he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a same Greek word there, mega calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with, same Greek word, mega fear, and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" See, Jesus, he awoke here, and two amazing things happened right away. First, his words were surprisingly simple. You notice that? Like, he didn't put on a show. Right? He didn't like raise a wand. He didn't do any kind of like special incantation at all. No, he just very simply said, "Quiet, be still." That's it. Like, in the face of like basically like a hurricane, right? He basically just says, "Enough." The same way that you would speak to an unruly child, right? Like, enough. And then the more astonishing thing that happens is that the storm actually obeyed. Right? It says the wind ceased and there was a great mega calm. Now, that sounds a little bit redundant at first when you read that, until you realize that Mark here, he's talking first about the wind and then he's talking about the water. He's saying the wind ceased and then there was a great calm amongst the water. The great calm right there, it could literally be translated dead calm. Have you ever seen water so smooth that it literally looks like glass? Right? You can like see your reflection in it. When I was younger, I spent a few summers driving ski boats for a living. Right? This is like a dream job. Right? It was like 6 days a week from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on the lake every day, water skiing, wakeboarding, tubing, all the sports all day long. I mean, it was so much fun. But as a boat driver, one of the things that we love to do is wake up early, even earlier, and get out there on the lake before anybody else was out there. And why? Because the morning was always the very best time to be out there, right? The water was like, we would call it, water was like glass, right? And you'd get out there and you could see your reflection. But every once in a while, when we were out there, these massive thunderstorms would roll in and come out of nowhere. And they'd roll in and it would just be terrible. Everybody would have to get off the lake. But even after the storm had passed, for the next several hours, that water would be very, very choppy, right? You've seen this before. The water is so choppy, it's not even fun to be out in the lake any longer. Yet when Jesus said, "Peace, be still," not only did the winds calm down, but also the water was now dead calm. See, one of the things about ancient cultures, one thing that was actually almost universally agreed upon was the belief that the sea was uncontrollable by anyone except God. Right? The sea was like a symbol of unstoppable destruction in all of the ancient legends. It's kind of like the way that we talk about the mountain today, right? If any of you are climbers, you know that there's a saying that goes, "The mountain always wins." Right? The mountain always wins. Right? And it's the same as the sea. The ocean, in full fury, held this uncontainable power. Only God could control it. And then here comes Jesus with just a few simple words. "Peace, be still." Exercising a power that only God has. Now, at some point, all of us, maybe even some of you right now in the room, you read a story like this, or you hear a story like this, and you inevitably ask the question, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? All right, what am I supposed to do with this? All right, it's like a miraculous story. It's a miraculous event. Jesus silences the wind and the waves with just a word, but what do I do with that? Well, ultimately, we've got one of two options. Either we believe that actually happened, And if so, I mean, that affects everything, right? Or we believe that it's total fabrication. And if that's the case, then this ought to have absolutely no bearing on our lives at all. It reminds me of Flannery O'Connor. Flannery O'Connor, one of my favorite authors, just a brilliant, Southern, provocative writer, and she wrote this series of short stories called "A Good Man Is Hard to Find." And a very, very brilliant writer. In fact, if you've never read her, I recommend reading her, although I have to give you the caveat and the warning. These are not like inspirational stories at all. These are very dark stories, but they're revealing about human nature, and they're revealing about the world that we live in. But in this story, A Good Man Is Hard to Find, there's two main characters. There's a grandmother who's very, very religious, and then there's this escaped convict who was nicknamed the Misfit. And then they kind of meet each other on the side of the road, and the Misfit is having this long, drawn-out conversation about religion with the grandmother, and he's having this conversation basically while he's like murdering her entire family one by one. Okay, I told you, it's a very dark story, all right? It's not inspirational at all, but that's what's happening, and he's having this long, drawn-out conversation with her, and it seems like the Misfit says, look, here's basically what he tells her. He says, Jesus has thrown everything out of whack. Jesus has thrown everything out of whack. He's basically kind of communicating this idea that the world is really, on one hand, it's either just the result of a storm. Either all there is nature, right? We're here by accident. We're here because of a storm. The forces of nature, blind forces of nature. We're here because of volcanoes or storms or the Big Bang. We're just here by accident, like a storm, right? And when you die, you're going back to dust. You came from dust, you're going back to dust, which means in the end, whether you're a saint or you're a sociopath, it doesn't really matter at all. So either that's the case, all we have is storm, or if Jesus is who he said he is, if he's, as we see here in Mark 4, if he is the Lord of the storm, then there's a certain safety. There's a certain meaning to our lives. See, if there's just storm, nothing means anything. All right, but if Jesus is real and he is who he said that he is, and then there's all kinds of meaning, and there's hope, and there's a certain security that you long for, that our hearts so naturally desire. But then what happens? What happens if that's true? Well, you kind of lose control, don't you? If Jesus really is who he says he is. Because you have to throw everything over. You have to hand everything over to him. And so Misfit in the story actually puts it perfectly when he says, Jesus has thrown everything out of whack. Everything's off balance now. If he did what he said he did, then there's nothing to do but to throw everything at him and follow him. But if he didn't, if it's all just a lie, if it's all just like a fairy tale, then there's nothing to do other than just enjoy the few minutes that you have left this is what he says, by killing somebody or burning down his house or doing some other kind of meanness, and there's hardly no pleasure in that, right? Again, very dark, but in fact, if you read any of like Flannery O'Connor's writings, you'll see, it's very hard to argue with her understanding of human nature. Now, back to the story here, when we look at what's happening here in Mark 4, in fact, can I show you one of the funnier parts of this story? Because I want you to see this. I want you to look at the emotional life of the disciples here. See, before Jesus calmed the storm, the disciples are scared, right? They're very, very scared. They're so scared, which is not hard to imagine. You've got the wind and the waves, and it's swamping the boat. It's literally filling the boat with all of this water. It's very, very scary. And so before Jesus calms the storm, they're so scared. But after Jesus calms the storm, they're even more scared. Right? They're terrified at this point. They're like, what just happened? They're freaking out even more. It gets worse. Why? Well, here's why. The picture here that we're given of Jesus awakened by these men. They're in the boat. They're so scared because the water's filling in. They're trying to bail the water, like good sailors or fishermen. They're trying to bail the water out of the boat, but they can't bail the water out of the boat quick enough. They think they're going to drown. So look what it says in verse 38. It says, but Jesus was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him, and they said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? What are they saying? They're saying, you don't care. We're dying and you don't care. Now look, every single person who's ever tried to live the life of faith. This is like so important. We've got to get this into our heart and recognize every single person who's ever tried to live the life of faith in this world at some point has gotten to this place. They have found themselves. You have found yourself in this place. God, it feels like I am drowning and you don't care. It feels like this world is crushing me right now. Nothing is going according to plan, and you don't seem to be here or around at all. Where are you? So they wake Jesus up, and they what do they basically tell him? They're saying, you have gone to sleep on us in our hour of greatest need. It is our hour of greatest need, and you are asleep. You don't care. Because if you loved us, you wouldn't be letting us go through this. Right? If you loved us, we wouldn't be going through this storm. If you loved us, we wouldn't be about to sink. Our boat wouldn't be going under. If you loved us, you would not let us suffer. And what does he do? What does Jesus do in this moment? Well, he wakes up, and the first thing he does is instantly, he calms the storm. Right? He calms the storm, dead calm. But then he turns around. And what does he say? What does he say to these disciples in the moment of these accusations? Like, oh, okay, I can understand how you would feel that way. No. He doesn't say that, does he? What does he say? Why were you afraid? Why were you afraid? What do you mean, why were you afraid? Jesus, we're drowning. Jesus, look at all the water in the boat. Jesus, we're about to go underneath. We're going to die. And we're terrified because if you loved us, this would not be happening right now. And what Jesus says is, you're wrong. You're wrong. Your premise is wrong. Your premise is wrong from the very beginning right now, and you should have known. This is in a lot of ways, this is a rebuke. He does not just rebuke the wind and the waves. He's rebuking his closest followers right now. He's saying, your premise is wrong. You should have known better. I do allow people that I love to go through storms. All right, in other words, he's saying two things can be true at the same time. Right? I can love you, and I can allow you to go through storms. But you had no right to panic. All right, now, Tim Keller points out something about this passage that I so much appreciate. He basically says, you know how the disciples are so scared? You know why they're so scared? They're scared because they're starting to realize in this very moment that Jesus is as unmanageable as the storm itself. Right? They're scared because they're starting to realize in this very moment that the storm, it has infinite power. You can't control it. But Jesus has infinitely more power, and we cannot control him either. You can't control him. You can't control Jesus. So you say, well, if you're paying attention, you may even ask, well, what's the difference? If the storm is uncontrollable and Jesus is uncontrollable, what's the difference in the end? And there's a huge difference. You know what the difference is? The storm doesn't love you. See, the misfit was right. He said, okay, you can say there's no Jesus. I don't believe in Jesus. Fine. Do you realize that you're at the mercy of the storm? You are. Your nature is going to wear you down. It always does at some point. It's going to wear you. Life is going to wear you down. Nature, if you live long enough, eventually at some point it wears you down. Your body is going to give out. You're going to die. Right? Now, here's a hard truth. Think about this for just a moment. Every single person that you know and love in your life at some point is going to die. We don't like to think about that. But that's true, isn't it? You can't deny it. Nature is violent. Nature is overwhelming. Nature is unmanageable, and it's exhausting, and at some point it will wear you down. But if you're paying attention, you'll say, well, Jesus doesn't seem that much better. Right? If he's got all this power, but he doesn't do things according to my plan, if he doesn't do things in a way that makes sense to me, if he is just as unmanageable as the storms themselves, what's the difference? And again, it's all the difference in the world. Because Jesus' unmanageable power, his unmanageable power, here's what the good news is. It's filled with love for you. It's filled with love for you. That's the difference. Elizabeth Elliot, she puts this so poignantly in 2 sentences. Here's what she says. God is God. And if he is God, he is worthy of my worship and my service. I will find rest nowhere but in his will. And that will is infinitely, immeasurably, unspeakably beyond my largest notions of what he is up to. You see that? It's like a storm, right? If you're at the mercy of the storm, it's unmanageable power, but it doesn't love you. The only place that's safe and secure is in the will of God. But the will of God, the arms of God, the love of God, the plans of God, it necessarily, because it's God and we're not God, it's necessarily, infinitely, immeasurably, unspeakably beyond your largest notions of what he's up to. In other words, what she's saying there is like, hey, if we're not God, and if you're not God, then why would we even begin to assume that I'm going to be able to fully understand and comprehend every single storm that I walk through in this life? They're saying we're not. That's what she's saying. She's like, I have to believe, I have to trust, actually, in the moments of walking through the seasons and the storms of this life, that I am not going to understand and fully comprehend every single reason for why I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing right now. But if God is God, then we have to believe that his plans, his wisdom, his will is infinitely, immeasurably, unspeakably beyond our comprehension. See, Jesus calms the storm here, and then remember what he said to the disciples? Or he asked them a question, didn't he? 2 questions, actually. Verse 40, he said to them, why are you so afraid? Now, that's an important question, isn't it? Why are you so, that's the kind of question some of you, like, you could spend the rest of the afternoon thinking about that question. Why am I so afraid? Like really, why am I so afraid right now? Why am I so anxious? Maybe for some of you, if I can just help you out for a little bit, if some of you could like think about this question on your ride home today. Maybe just carve out some time this week. You just sit down with this. Maybe one way to think about this, rather than just trying to answer the question, maybe turn it into a sentence. And just say, I am afraid because, fill in the blank. I am afraid because I hate the idea of being alone. I am afraid because it might be this way forever. I'm afraid because I think God has forgotten me. I'm afraid because my kids might not turn out the way that I expected them to turn out. I'm afraid because I feel stuck in my career. I'm afraid because the future feels so scary. I'm afraid because my marriage sucks. Life is too busy. The pressure is unrelenting, and I'm not sure I will ever be happy. I'm afraid that nothing will change. And I'm afraid that everything might change. Why are you so afraid? That's the question that Jesus asked. But he doesn't leave it there, does he? What does he say? Have you still no faith? Which that could actually be translated, where is your faith? I love that way of phrasing it. Where is your faith? In other words, where have you put it? Like, where did you place it? See what Jesus is doing right here. He's recognizing something that's true for all of us. We all have faith. Right? There's not a single person in this world that does not have faith. We are all trusting in something or someone. But the question is, where have you placed that faith? Or in whom have you placed that faith? See, you get to the end of the story here, and then you ask the question, well, how do the disciples respond? Look at verse 41. It says, they were filled with great, mega fear and said to one another, who then is this? The question that they should have been asking from the very beginning, right? Who is this? See, when Jesus says, where is your faith? I think what he's trying to say is like, listen, you're looking at the storm right now when you should have been looking at me. And you know who I am. You know what I'm like. You know that all that I've done. Right? You know how I've fed the hungry. Fed miraculously the 5,000 and the 4,000. You've seen me raise the dead. You've watched me pledge my love to you. You've seen all these things happen. But at the moment that hardship strikes, right? Or actually, the moment that hardship strikes you, suddenly you begin questioning all of that and you begin to panic. What you should have done, is what Jesus is basically saying, what you should have done in this moment, instead of just looking at the storm, you should have been looking at the character of me. Like, you know my character, you know my nature, you know what I've done, you know what I've promised you, you know who I am. And if you would have remembered those things instead of just looking at the storm and looking at the waves and looking at the wind in that very moment, then you would have known, I'm not going to let you drown. You would have believed that. See, Jesus, what he's saying here is like when you panic, when you find yourself afraid, when you walk through seasons of anxiety, what you're really doing in those very moments is it's not so much showing a lack of faith, you're just exposing where you actually place your faith. It's revealing, this is what every storm tends to do. It reveals where we ultimately place our faith. And oftentimes in the midst of those seasons and those storms, we're placing our faith in something or someone other than Jesus. Let me just ask you a question for just a moment. Just think about this. Do you believe that Jesus Christ was the incarnate Son of God born in a manger? Do you believe that he died on a cross to atone for our sins? That he ascended resurrected physically from the dead, ascended through the heavens, and he's now sitting at the right hand of the Father, interceding for us and governing all the events of human history, and he promises to come back again to redeem and restore and to judge the living and the dead and make all things right. Do you believe that? Yes. All right. If you believe that, then here's the reality. No storm on this earth can face anything that you're walking through. You've got the loving, living God in your corner, and he is telling you he is able to conquer everything. No earthly storm can compare. Right now, we see what he's doing here is he's challenging us to ask, where have I placed my faith? We look at the disciples here, and they're screaming at Jesus. You don't care. You don't love us. You're going to let us drown. Now, the reality is, we have to recognize, we know something the disciples don't know, right? We understand something. We have the benefit, we have the privilege of being able to recognize that on the cross, that Jesus Christ experienced the greatest storm possible. Right, we know that at the cross, the storm of God's wrath, the storm of divine justice came down on Jesus, and because he loved us, because he loves us so much, he obediently bowed his head into that storm, and he took it upon himself in our place. And because he obediently went through that storm in our place for our sin, then we know that as we walk through every single storm on this earth, we don't have to ask the question, Lord, do you not care? He has already demonstrated that he does. He has shown us, he has proven to us, yes, this is how much I love you, that I'm willing to go to the cross, that I'm able to go through the worst cosmic storm in all of the universe for you. See, here's what I know, and honestly, here's what we all know. Every single one of us, at some point, and some of you maybe even right now, but all of us, at some point, you will face unimaginable storms in this life that you do not expect, right? That you just didn't see coming. John 16:33, in this world, you will have trouble, right? That's one of the promises of Jesus that we don't like to claim that much, do we? In this world, you will have trouble, and yet for so many of us, and we know what this feels like. The moment that tragedy strikes, the moment that difficulty comes our way, what's our natural disposition? Why is it so hard? Why is this happening? Why can't God just wave the magic wand and make this all disappear and eliminate all the suffering? Why does this happen to us? See, the disciples here, they're showing us something. They're revealing something, actually, that's very important. When we hear them crying out, guys, listen, this is maybe identifying a key distinguishing factor for truly experiencing the power of God in your life. Why do I say that? I just say that because here's what I believe. Every professing Christian, anybody who identifies as a follower of Jesus, at some point in your life, you come basically to a tipping point. What do I mean by that is that you have to come to this place where if you go over the tipping point, you come to a place where you're able to actually take ownership of your faith in such a way, with such conviction, and to be able to settle, this is what I believe about the character of God. this is what I know to be true about God. When it comes to all the questions, is he good? Is he actually loving? Does he actually care? Is he actually with you? Is he actually for you? It's not until you go over that tipping point that you're able to answer those questions. Yes, I believe that. I believe he's good. I believe that he cares. I believe that he's loving. I believe that he is just. And when you go over that, you know what happens? You form the foundation of the rest of your life. That's what happens. But until you do that, if you're on the other side, the front end of that tipping point, you know what happens? Anytime something bad occurs, anytime a storm shows up, and you know what? Life is filled with storms. That's a given, isn't it? Like every one of us, we're going to go through storms. But every time one of those storms comes, you know what happens? It's like, I don't know. I don't know if I can believe any of this anymore. Like everything is upended. I'm not sure if I can believe in God anymore because of X, Y, Z happened. Or this took place, and I'm not sure I can actually do this. And the rest of your life is just kind of going back and forth, wondering and debating whether you can actually believe God for who he is. You've got to go over the tipping point. Right? You've got to go over the edge. You have to settle. You have to have that conviction in your heart and in your life. I believe God is who he says he is. This is what I know to be true about his character. This is what I know to be true about his nature. Is he loving? Yes. Is he just? Yes. Does he care? Yes. And once you have that settled, once you have that confidence, maybe that's the best word to describe this. Once you have that confidence in God's character, then not only are you able to pull out that faith and place it in an all-knowing, all-caring, all-loving God, but then you are also, you know what happens? You are able then to be able to walk with great assurance through every single storm in this life. Even when you do not fully comprehend, you know, I can trust him. I can trust him. His uncontainable power is being used for my good, whether I see it or not, whether I understand it or not. I know that he is working that power for my good. You're able to join the saints in being able to declare that he is working all things, not just some things, but he is working all things together for our good. John Newton captured this so well in one of his letters. Newton was a slave trader turned Christian, turned preacher, turned abolitionist. And he says this, he says there comes a moment in every one of our lives, basically, where you're going to have to make that decision. Like you're going to have to come to a place, have you settled this issue about God's character in your life? Do you trust him? And he says something interesting, basically. He's like, if you come to the point where if you have that resolved in your heart, if you know those things to be true about God, he says, you're basically like on the downward slope of your Christian life from that moment on. Like you're basically like, you're going to make it. You're going to be able to walk through all the other hard things that you experience in life with a great confidence and assurance that you're able to grow into the fullness of what Christ has for you. Kind of like we saw the mustard seed, the tree growing into the fullness of those things. But he captures this in one of his hymns, and I want to end with this today and help you see how he so beautifully talks through this. This is what he says. He said, God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds you so much dread are big with mercy and shall break with blessings on your head. Father, we thank you this morning for your word. God, we thank you even just for the promise of your presence with us through every single storm that we walk through. God, we know that is your great gift to us, that your Holy Spirit is with us even right now. And God, we know that many of us in this room right now feel like we are walking through the storm. So, Father, I pray that in your kindness and in your grace right now, would you just remind us so personally and so powerfully that you are here, that you see us, that you don't just know exactly what it is that we're walking through, but you so deeply care. care about every detail of our lives. That is a promise. And so, Father, we pray that today, right now, even in this very moment, that we would be reminded and we would be encouraged that as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, as we walk through the season of the storm, we are reminded that we do not walk alone. We walk with you. We walk alongside you. We walk alongside others. The good gift that you give us in this church. We are never alone. That is your promise to the end of the age. So, Father, I pray that today you would just encourage and remind our hearts of those realities. That we would be the type of men and women, that we would literally be a people who walk with great confidence through this life. Because you truly are Lord of the storm. We pray these things in the good, holy, faithful name of Jesus.